Kiwi Ears is a brand that many attribute to their tasteful tuning and quite beautiful aesthetics. But today, we're going to be talking about one of their more fun releases. Today, we are going to be talking about the Kiwi Ears Quartet, a $109 bassy boy that you might want to consider if you are into a lot of bass, but something that you might also like if you like a good fitting and an aesthetically pleasing IM. Let's talk about it. Big thanks to Linsol for sending over the quartets for my honest impressions. I was not paid or compensated in any way for this review, and all thoughts are of my own volition. So, Kiwi Ears Quartet. This is $109, and if you want to know more about the details and stuff like that, check out the link down in the description or up in the card up top to know everything you need to know about the Kiwi Ears Quartet. Now, starting with the accessories, the Kiwi Ears Quartet comes with this kind of black carbon-like carrying pouch that is of a solid material, which means this is going to protect the IEMs from, I guess, pressure and some scratches. It is definitely spacious. It is much bigger than, say, the Heart Mirror or the KB Ears style of hard cases, so I very much prefer it. And there is a webbing on the inside to be able to fit, I think, even a small DAP. I know DACs you can fit in there, but it is definitely more than spacious to fit an IEM, maybe two, and maybe a DAC and some accessories. Now, moving on to the ear tips, there are 3 pairs of ear tips that come with the quartets. Actually, I think 4. No, it's just 3 pairs, 3 different colors, but they're kind of all the same, and I'm not a big fan of the ear tips. They're kind of a little too cheap feeling, a little too soft, but not in a good sense, where the flange or the outer material of the ear tip feels a little too thin, that when it tries to go into your ear, sometimes there could be a seal issue. At the same time, the overall fitting of the quartets don't really match the style or the tips that it comes with. Having foam tips would have also been really nice, as the quartets would have really have benefited a lot from a little bit tamer upper mids and just an overall more snug fit, at least compared to the stock tips. But I'll share my favorite tips. Probably the best ones I've tried were the Clarions. Sure, they kind of opened up the sound a little bit more, which I'm going to be talking about later, which was really nice. But in terms of fitting, the absolute best, and then I guess the other one would be the TRNT. Those 2 tips are just absolutely fantastic. TRNT somewhat tames the bass a little bit. Also somehow tames the spike in the treble also a little bit, which I really enjoyed. Those are my 2 recommended tips for you to try out with the quartets. Now, moving on to the build and fit. If you're anything like me, you probably saw the quartets and saw how absolutely beautiful it looked. And I just want to say, in real life, it is so much better than in photos, because in photos it looks really nice. Yeah, it looks very pretty, very purple, but the vibrancy in real life, having it in your hands, is just so it is genuinely so beautiful. And the color purple is kind of rare in IEMs nowadays. There's like a few that I can count with my hand, like the Vision Ears EXT, the Kiwi Ears own Cadenza, I guess you could see the Kailua as well. There's just not a lot of purple IMs in the market, and I appreciate Kiwi Ears really went down to town with the purpleness of the quartets. So that's that. And in terms of fitting as well, my goodness, this is hands down one of the best fitting IMs, again, with tip rolling, because again, tip rolling is probably the most essential thing about the quartets, not only in fit but in the sound, which I'll talk about later. But this is genuinely one of the best fitting IM I've felt under 200. The way that it's contoured into your ear just perfectly sits into your ear. The size is on the larger side, so sleeping with it, not really recommended, but as it is, it's extremely stable. It is not fatiguing, surprisingly, despite having the contours inside of the IMs itself. But it is just so good, such a solid fitting IM. Hands down the best under 200 I tried so far. Obviously, it's beaten out by the the AFL Performer 5, and actually it's under 150, because the AFL Magic one also kind of beats the fitting of the quartets. But for like $109 and below, no, this is the best fitting that you're ever gonna find, or at least I've found in IM. So that's really nice. Now, the resin material itself is pretty, cheap feeling. It's not really the most premium feeling, but it is very lightweight, which helps with the overall comfort that you have for longer listening sessions and just overall initial fitting, where it doesn't feel fatiguing, it doesn't feel weighty or drags down your ears, which is often a problem for fitting with IEMs, which also has to do with the cable. And speaking of the cable, it is not my favorite cable. This is a little bit on the, I guess, less premium side, but it does have a wonderful, wonderful comfort to it. The ear hooks don't hurt my ears, which is very common for a lot of stiffer cables. The material of the cable itself, I've had experiences with this, and they kind of get stiff over time, but it is definitely much more than functional. It is also very comfortable. It is lightweight. The braids are confident, and just overall, it's really nice. The interfaces are, pretty okay. Nothing too special, too fancy. The chin cinch is very functional. I really appreciate that. But as an overall, like for the $100 price, I've tried better cables, like from Lecture. Lecture cables are just so good, even for like $109, like the Galileo or the DZ4. Just absolutely wonderful cable. But the Quartet's cable, not bad at all. And it's free for microphonics, it's memory free, so no really issues with that. It's just like the overall feel, and for the price, you might not like it as much. But I think it's functional. I think it's fine. Just nothing too special. Now moving on to the sound, first and foremost, this had undergone around 10 hours of burn period. If you believe in that, I just want to have it there as well. I'm also listening mostly to jazz, R&B, a little bit of funk, and the vocal pop, Leve, Nora Jones, all that. And with drivability, the Quartets are quite easy to drive. They're more than enough for a smartphone, but it really does shine with better sources, with more powerful sources. It kind of, especially actually warmer sources as well, as this kind of scales really nicely, especially with how much more dynamic the bass can sound when you have more power at hand. But again, smartphone, completely fine. You don't need more power than that. Even just like a dongle DAC is more than enough to be happy with the overall sound of the Quartets. Testing of the Quartets were done basically on the stock tips, stock cable, stock everything. I used mostly my Hibby R6 Gen 3, sometimes my R3 Gen 2, and recently the Hibby Digital M300 for my sources, and my Zishan U1. Now, I will be talking more about the tuning modes later on, but for now, I'm going to be talking about my favorite tuning mode, the down-up configuration, which brings up the upper mids and tames down the bass a little bit. So, for the sound signature, it is more of a U-shaped, almost V-shaped style sound signature with a lot of bass energy, kind of recessed mids, and quite a lot of upper mids to treble energy. Now, starting with the bass is thick, it is lush, it is smooth. I especially love listening to R&B on the Quartets, like something like Daniel Caesar's New Roses, or I don't know how to pronounce the first word for that, but the New Roses. It sounds so lush, it sounds so thick, and just so meaty that it's so satisfying to listen to. Although I will say that this is definitely on the slower side in terms of attack. It's not really snappy or tight. It is more on the loose, more on the smushy and the smooth side. So this isn't something you would listen to if you want tighter sounding bass, or I guess more nuanced bass. Although texture is decent, but not really the best. I was expecting, honestly, something more tactile with the Quartets, but it's more lush. So that's what I found for the bass presentation. Moving on to the mids, it is surprisingly clean. I didn't expect this for a bass-centric set, especially for 2DDs. It was quite clean. It's not the cleanest, it's not the most open, but considering that this is a bass-centric set, the vocals are generally honestly quite unintrusive. The male vocals have a nice tinge of warmth to them, although they kind of get a little bit recessed when it comes to the higher octaves. I guess you move on to vocals like Brendan Urie or even like Daniel Caesar, his vocals sometimes kind of get up there, and they kind of get drowned out in the bass and the upper mids to treble region, but not too much that it bothers me personally. It is just something I noticed that it doesn't really bring out male vocals as much. But the nice thing is it doesn't color them too warm. It is warm, but in a realistic sense. Like there's this organic quality to male vocals for the quartets. And while we're at it, let's talk about female vocals, which I thought was pretty nice on the quartet. They're forward, they're very engaging, energetic. There's a decent amount of nuance, which means the details when it comes to the different qualities and timbre of vocals for female vocals. I guess I would use Leve as an example. Her vocals sounded quite smooth, yet still decently detailed for the quartets, and I quite enjoyed listening to Leve on this IAM. I didn't expect that, especially since I've noticed that Leve is better off with more lean sets due to her warmer leaning vocals, but the quartets decently actually kind of presented her voice really nicely. So that's for upper mids and female vocals. Instruments in this region, definitely more on the tamer side, not as emphasized as the bass or the treble, but especially for the upper frequencies or the upper mid-range, like the string instruments, air instruments, there's definitely a nice sparkly energy, forward energy that really brings out the details in those instruments. And moving on to the treble, it is sparkly, it is quite, not necessarily bright, but it's definitely sparkly with a lot of percussive instruments having a very energetic sound. However, it is on the grainier side, so if that's the type of sound that kind of bothers you, then yeah, definitely consider not really getting this. I'm kidding now. But this is something that you might want to be aware of if you're going to be buying the quartets, because I found it to be a little bothersome when it comes to poorly mixed tracks, as there's a little bit of sibilance, there's sharpness, and I'm really not a fan of that. It's kind of I guess unrealistic sounding. There's this kind of like coherency, which I'll talk about more later, but there's this coherency difference between the bass, the slowness of the bass, and the snappiness of the treble. Air region, it's okay, that's fine. It's not too airy, but it's definitely more on the clean side. It doesn't sound too sibilant, it doesn't sound too airy or unrealistically airy. It is just alright. Moving on to the timbre, this is where I mentioned earlier the coherency problem, and unfortunately, yes, the bass sounds slower than the treble region, which I wasn't that big of a fan of, because I personally prefer the timbre of single DDs, although this is something common in hybrid sets, especially in the budget, where there is a difference between the bass sounding slow and the treble sounding very incisive and fast. So honestly, I can't really pinpoint. I can't really nitpick too much, but $109, I think something like the Quartet, but something like the Hexa has done the hybrid sound just a little bit better, but it's a different type of tuning anyways. Now moving on to the technicalities, it's alright. It's not really the most technical sounding set, and it doesn't try to be a technical sounding set, except for the treble region, where it tries to be snappy, transient, and resolving, where it just ends up being kind of metallic and just unrealistic. And for the staging, not really that wide. It's decently wide. Depth is good, but the height is not so good. The separation and imaging is alright as well, nothing too fantastic. Kind of lags behind other $109 sets, which I'll talk about later. But just for overall text, not really the most fantastic, not really the most mind-blowing, but it's there, it's good. Now moving on to the other tuning modes, starting with the up-up configuration, it has more bass than the down-up configuration, making the vocals sound considerably more lush and smooth at the expense of vocal clarity, which the down-up configuration has going for. Now moving on to the up-down configuration, this is the polar opposite of the down-up. This is absolutely bass-emphasized, vocals are sunken, and the trebles just also kind of really lush as well, but this is the most relaxed sounding, so if you want a chill listen, the up-down configuration is the configuration for you. Now for the down-down, it's basically like the previous mode, but the harshness of the down-up mode, and this is probably like the worst mode in my opinion. It is how do I say it? It's not that good in my opinion. There's too much treble energy. There's too much bass energy. It makes the balance overall too leaning to a harsh V shape than a smooth V shape that the other modes, or L shape that the other modes have set in stone. Now, for real world usage, for casual browsing, this is really good thanks to the fit. It is soothing, it is clean, so for longer listening sessions, it is pretty good. Although, if you are listening to something more sibilant or not that very well mixed, I know well mixed in real world doesn't sound, or casual browsing doesn't sound too fantastic, but if you listen to anything sibilant, it might stand out and pierce your ears. But generally, in my experience, casual browsing was honestly really, really good, especially that fit. So good, such a good fit. Now moving on to the gaming, Danny from Awesome Danny made an awesome video about the gaming prowess of the Quartets, and I want to test for myself, so check that video out. But from my personal experience, this is a really good gaming set, especially in the down-up configuration. It brings out the upper mids in a way that brings out the more emphasized parts of the game, such as like the gunshots, the smaller, nuanced footsteps, but still brings the depth for immersiveness and this sort of like, because the footsteps have low end in them as well, which I found to be quite problematic for leaner sounding sets where I couldn't hear the footsteps or like the lower parts of the footsteps, which makes me purely focus on the upper frequencies. This presents the lower frequencies of the footsteps really, really well, which means the imaging was also pretty good. The stage not so much, but the imaging of this was absolutely fantastic. The sharp treble might be a problem if you listen to sharper sounding guns. For me, it's like the Phantom from Valorant kind of gets a little bit piercing at times, especially in the Prime variant, but honestly, it was well worth the sacrifice for how good this was for gaming. So that's for gaming. And lastly, for comparisons, now let's start with its fellow $109 technically 2DD as well, because this is a 2DD hybrid 2BI as well, but the 7Hz legato, another bassy set. And unlike the legato, the Quartets actually have a more focused on overall tonal balance, with a more forward vocals, more natural sounding mid-range, while keeping the bass quite punchy and very immersive and lush. But what the legato has is a more confident bass head tuning that really wants you to crank that bass up. As what they said, it's like a vintage old speaker system, as the people who were advertising the legato said it was, and it is just a more confident, a more, I would say, focused IM to what it's trying to do, while the Quartets is more trying to do everything all at once. In my personal preference, I would honestly put them side by side and use one if I want just a little bit more bass energy, and one if I just want a little bit more of a balanced but still bassy sound signature. So it's up to you. Do you want something that is purely for bass heads, or if you want something that's a bit more balanced but bass centric? So they're both $109 anyway, so really you won't really have to sacrifice much in terms of money for picking between both of them. Now moving on to the EM6L, which is another $109 IM. This is a more U-shaped, bright-leaning sound signature as akin to many SimGot IMs. And this is a completely different kind of flavor. If the Quartets are bassy hybrids, these are a bright hybrids. So completely clashing ideologies in its tuning. So pick if you want something more brighter, more analytical, more technical, go for the EM6L. If you want something more lush, something a little bit more organic sounding, go for the Quartets. Now another $109 IM, the Ledger Galileo, RIP, because I don't think it's being manufactured anymore, but if you still get your hands on them, this Galileo is a much more neutral sounding IM, akin to the EM6L, but this is much more neutral, more, I guess, mid-centric as well compared to the Quartets. So these are gonna be your neutral sets, something a bit more smooth overall, something a bit more vocal, with really good timbre compared to the Quartets. but the quartets are considerably more fun to listen to, considerably more well-rounded for most genres compared to the Galileos. If you want something more neutral, something more reference sounding, go for the Galileo. If you want something more fun, you go for the quartets. Now, going down in price, the Triple and Kailua price at $79, 2DD as well, just 2DD this one, not a hybrid like the quartets. It basically tries to do the exact same thing as the quartets, but in my opinion, it just does it a little bit better. And what do I mean by that? The quartets follow this warmer U-shaped or V-shaped sound signature. Same with the Kailua, but the Kailua has a much more organic, natural timbre, no metallic sound to the upper mid-range. The mid-range definitely sounds more organic compared to the quartets. And they're both very fun sounding set, but the Kailuas have a much more dynamic, tighter sounding bass compared to the quartets. However, the quartets have an overall a better tonal balance when it comes to pushing the upper mids in a more, I guess, forward way, which puts vocals in a much more immersive position compared to the Kailuas. And it might be something that you prefer. If you want something more forward, something more less intrusive in the vocals, you want to go for the quartets. But if you want something more organic, more lush in the vocals, something more natural sounding in the upper mids to treble, you go for the Kailua. And lastly, obviously, we have to compare it to the benchmark of the sub $100, the Truthier Clinical Zero Red. And in short, the Clinical Red is just considerably more natural sounding in the entirety of its frequency. The bass is much more neutral, the mids are much more organic sounding, and the upper mids to treble are much more lush, but also kind of less transient, less snappy, less incisive sounding compared to the quartets. But the quartets, again, is a much more fun IEM to listen to, much more engaging, but also a little bit more offensive sounding. If there's the inoffensive sounding quality that the red has, the quartets are more offensive sounding, for the lack of a better term. So to conclude, the quartets are honestly a really, really interesting sounding IEM with a really fun and engaging sound that is really good for basically most genres that you throw it at. And it's really good fitting. It is really good looking. But the problem might be that you might find that the upper mids, the treble region, might sound a little bit unrealistic, a little bit metallic, the bass not to sound as dynamic as other dynamic drivers IEMs in this price range, and you might also find the accessories to be a little bit lacking. But if you are looking for a really fun, really engaging IEM with pretty good gaming prowess, really good fit, and a nice purple aesthetic, then the Kiwi Ears Quartet is the IEM for you. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like the quartets or if you want to buy the quartets, let me know down in the comments below. I really want to know what you think about the quartets, because I personally really enjoyed the quartets while I was testing them and just gaming with them especially. They're currently my gaming set right now. So, you know, props to Kiwi Ears for making a pretty good gaming set, even though they didn't really intend to make one. But yeah, if you like the video, like and subscribe. Check out my socials down below. Join Discord, join our chats, and check out Audio Notions. With that, OB Audio out.